Welcome back to the round 3 of my tournament in Cambridge, England after the major upset total collapse in round 2. See that if you haven't. I am playing an 1800 called Simon E. Lazarus, who was, I think, in his 60s when we played, and my opponent plays everything. Same as round 1 pretty much, like 50-year career, and has a lot of experience, plays pretty much everything over the board. I go with F5 here. I had prepped this all day. I was ready to play this, and I play this move for the first time in my life. This is called the Dutch Stonewall. Now, in previous videos and previous recaps, I have played similar structures to the Dutch Stonewall, but never have I played one F5 in my life. Let's get into the game. G3, my opponent is going for just like a ready formation. The point of the Dutch Stonewall is that you're just taking up this E4 square, like threefold, but you're giving up this E5 square, and this is a super huge weakness for black. So D5, I go with development, and now bishop F4. In all the GM games that I saw, specifically Laurent Fressinet plays really well the Dutch Stonewall. He's played it like 2 or 3 times, and he got a nice win. And Magnus has played the Dutch Stonewall. So after bishop F4, you pretty much always take on F4 from what I saw. So takes, and now I go with castles. And after E3, this is where you hear something from one ear and the other ear it goes out, because Magnus has said in his course on chess.com for members only that the bishop can slide up, down, and recycle itself into this very nice diagonal. But in the GM games I saw afterwards, b6 and bishop a6 is actually the best method. So you want to get your bishop out on this diagonal, and this is reserved for just later on in the game when your knight is already developed, let's say to f6. The knight is really truly supposed to go to d7, unless you have time in the position, which I don't here. So bishop d7 is played, which is inaccurate, and this lets a lot of blows on the queen side, which my opponent killed. Like, my opponent is a little underrated in my opinion. c4, c6, very, very typical things. Queen b3, striking b7, and I defend with b6. Now my opponent goes knight c3. My opponent has a lovely, lovely development. Like, so far, my opponent is outplaying me 10-1. My bishop is looking sad, my knight is not developed and very passive, which is really a domino effect to my rook being passive. So I go bishop b8. I really, accelerate this plan. I want to get my knight to d7, pardon. Knight e5 is played, and I'm supposed to go knight e4. Like, this is one of the typical things of the Dutch Stonewall, but it's just like succumbs to f3 things. Although the engine says that, you should go knight e4 now because I am threatening a fork, and so this would force some outcomes, either a trade or a queen move or a rook move to defend against this. But I go bishop h5, still inaccurate. Again, once you have the wrong plan, the engine is probably like just looking the other way, right? So takes, and now I take with the c-pawn, and now a4. It's a mistake because it allows knight e4 with the same idea I told you. I'm threatening this fork, but I was scared of this at the time. a4 is threatening a5, and this is a minority attack on my pawns. It's really scary. If I take this, there's like queen b7 things, and I just wanted to block it off straight away. So I go a6, and on a5, the idea is I go b5, and I completely block this off. It's very, very beautiful. My opponent goes with rook fc1, and now I find a way to try to develop. You see, the plan here for the black pieces, if there is one, is really to counterattack on this weak king. Like, there's a semi-open g-file. I need to play g5 or get my knight out first, support g5 with my queen, open up this file, and then get like a rook on here. So I start that already with rook a7. Like, I really want to do plans like this, and I was really happy to find this during the game. And now my opponent gets very scary. Rook c2. Rook c2, I'm already down to 54 minutes, and my opponent is already trying to double on the c-file and going like rook c8 things. It's really scary. It comes very, very fast. And I'm between very much 2 moves here. Knight e4 and knight g4, and I think for so long between these two. Knight e4, the engine doesn't like. Knight takes, f takes, and this g5 thing is too slow because of these rooks coming in too fast. And I kind of do white a favor because white has a knight blocking up their c-file, and this just unclogs everything. So I played knight g4. Thank God that's the better move. Knight g4 helps support this. I can take this in the future. I can play this and this. Plans are smoking up. Something's cooking in the kitchen. My opponent goes with h3, attacking my knight. Very bad move. I think that rook c8 and just going for your plan because you're first to the table, you get to eat first, right? But h3, I'm talking about food right now. I haven't eaten all day. I'm so hungry. h3 attacking my knight. h3 attacking my knight, and now I can just take and gain the initiative, like pa pa, and now I can go with knight d7. Actually on f takes, I had something completely different prepared. I had maybe f4 things to try to open up here. But on d takes, I was originally planning going g5, and the engine agrees g5 is better to open up here. But I realized something that's really cool, is that when moving your pawn from d to e, this c5 square is now open. And my knight, who has been praying, now can go to d7 and c5. I really, really enjoyed this. Finally, it's like it's free. You're free now. You're free now. a5 is played. I go b5. Very, very happy about this. Apparently, just taking this pawn is better, but I didn't like the play this offers for the white pieces. I opened some files I don't want opened. But anyways, b5 is played, and now my opponent plays rook d2. I really hate this move. Rook d2 is really slow, and it's projecting exactly what you want to do. It's too obvious. Here, white is like screaming at me that you're threatening takes, queen takes d5 check, and then you're trying to win my knight with like e6. White's plan was perfect as it was. Double your rooks, open up your knight, with like knight e2, a2, and then just go on c8, and it's like, you can win, bro. So I could just go king h8, and apparently this is inaccurate, but really it's not bad. Like, I'm not losing from this. Takes, I would be completely fine. In fact, it's small advantage for the black pieces. Queen takes, queen c8. I would have to play perfectly. A stronger player would probably have the guts to play this. My opponent told me after the game that he thought about taking here so many times. Eventually didn't, actually. So we're safe there. Queen b4 to take up this square on c5. I really want to go knight c5. That's why I played knight d7, knight c5 on tempo, knight e4. And finally we would have a Dutch Stonewall knight. I go knight b8. Very cool move. Knight b8 has per goal to go knight c6 and really kick the queen. The rook goes back to c2. As I told you, it's just like rook d2 is terrible, and now white loses a move with rook c2. So I go rook c8, c7, and now I'm actually fighting for the file. I'm fighting against white on their own territory when this could have been completely white territory with rook ac1, knight a2. It's completely over. Now, I am not going for this plan anymore. I don't have to like just weaken my king. I can just go for this file and just absolutely tank this with rook c4. And that's what I do. After rook ac1, I go rook c4. And suddenly I don't love the white pieces. On queen b3, I don't see much counterplay, and maybe g5 now because my rook is hitting this. It's so nice. And if queen here, it loses to this fork. So white plays the only move, queen d6. Very interesting. Do you take this queen or do you not? If you don't, in my opinion, you're kind of giving white the initiative. It's white's turn to really slay right now. So I trade, and then I go rook c8. So I'm threatening b4 to win a piece. And this pawn is not doing much, and I'm just going for the long term, like I'm just gonna scoop up this pawn long term. That's the plan here for the black pieces. My bishop is very offside, I know about this. Bishop f1, the only move, I had seen this, and I go rook c6. I'm still threatening b4, so bishop d3 to defend, and now on b4 you can move your knight, and it's not a threat anymore because it's defended enough here. And now, I'm looking for ways to take back this pawn. It's really not obvious. If I am too ambitious and I take here, knight takes b5, rook takes, and then I take back the knight, and it's checkmate in 2 moves. So I can't take immediately. How do I take? So there's 2 ways. Either I play this very slow, go bishop e8, bishop d7, I defend this rook, I defend this pawn, and I take here, or I can go with my king and preparing my king to be centralized for the endgame, to be high for the endgame, all of this good stuff. So I looked at tactics. King g8, let's calculate together, knight takes. I just saw like rook takes, and then even if you get like this check in between, I go here, and then rook takes, rook takes, bishop takes, and I can go like here and scoop up the pawn. But then I thought, on king g8, my opponent can just do knight takes here, and I can just take. And my rooks are perfectly defended, and this is totally fine. Like, knight takes d5 is not even a threat at this point. And so I just go on and I play king g8, which is a mistake. My opponent goes knight takes d5, and you can see the eval bar going crazy a little bit there. I'll touch up on that in a second. On knight takes d5, I now realize, it's already played on the board, I now realize, oh my goodness. If I take this knight here, my opponent can go d7. And now, if I take this, rook takes and I lose a rook, right? It's completely over. And basically it's a double deflection. If I move my rook, I'm off the rook here, and then just rook takes and I'm down in the endgame. Like, I'm just losing this endgame, it's completely over. Completely over. So what do I do? The knight has taken on d5. And so, in fact, this is in fact winning for black because of a crazy resource that I failed to see. E takes, and on d7 anyways, you have rook g6 check. What? The king has to move, and then you don't take here because of rook takes, so you have to go rook f8. If you go rook d8, there's rook here and you can't defend this. So rook f8, you're threatening the pawn. And now bishop takes f5, defending. If I take here, there's rook c8 and I'm losing. And now I have to find rook d6 and I'm winning back the pawn. Rook c7 and then rook takes f5, right. So I'm threatening the bishop and the pawn, and I would win this because of rook g6. Insane intermezzo. Here, way back when, my opponent has a win with knight takes b5. Intending that when I swap rooks, and this is the least of my calculations, I did not look at this, my opponent did not look at this, takes, pawn takes, and now white wins with a6. If knight takes d7, and I can't stop the pawn, absolutely insane combination. I would have lost on the spot there. My opponent takes on d5, and I miss takes. I missed the resource with rook g6. So I go rook takes, and I go down a pawn. And now we fall into the endgame. Ladies and gentlemen, I am down a pawn against an 1800. This is the time to lock in. In the endgame, the plan is greater than your next move. I have two options. Either I go scoop this pawn with king e8, king d7, and takes, or I can prevent counterplay, which is usually the endgame what you want to do. So if king e8 is what I looked at first, it's a juicier option. King e8, there's e4. e4 pressures this, and then once I take, bishop takes, king here, and then bishop takes h7, and I'm not sure about the future of this position, especially this king side with a 2 against 1 or a 3 against 1. However, if I try to prevent e4 first with bishop f3, then my opponent has some very nice things. Notably, I saw bishop b3. And now my plan here is absolutely screwed up. If I go king e8, bishop takes e6. So my king is like fixed onto this pawn, and it's really irritating. I can't win this pawn anymore. So I just go king e8, e4, I take, and now my opponent doesn't take here, plays f5. On takes, knight takes, and I guess you defend your pawn and attack mine. I'm not going for that. So I go king d7. And now my opponent takes here with check, and only one of these two pawn taking moves, only one is draw, and the other one is completely losing. Which one would you take? Comment in the chat below. If I take this pawn, it is completely losing to knight f5 check. And now I cannot take this pawn. Remember, I have to take both pawns to equalize. I can't take this pawn because I lose my bishop. Insane tactics. So I have to do like this, knight g7, and this pawn runs while my bishop has to move. It's completely over. Like, I'm not. So I saw this and I played this. Oh my God, I almost played the other one. Whew. So I played this, and this is weak now. I can't really take this now because of knight f5 still, but I have time to play like g6. And my opponent takes the pawn, and now I play g6. I should have played king takes d6, says the engine, and after here, king e5 is so nice. And if you take this, I take the bishop, you take my bishop, and I play knight c6 and win this pawn. And on this queen side, I'm gonna be winning the game. I didn't see this. I played g6, defending my pawn here, and after knight c6, I play knight d7, check, I take, the pawn is falling, like this is all, we're just like, my opponent is just trying to salvage this pawn, the pawn is falling, and this is like equal until b4. This is equal until b4, my opponent plays b4, and now I see something that really made my eyes go bright. I know you're looking into my eyes right now and you're like, this guy's eyes can't go bright. My eyes lit up. I went king e5, W or L plan, king e5. Attacking this bishop. The bishop goes to b7. I mean, you want to go bishop b7 to attack my pawn. And now my plan was legit to go knight b8 and defend. And now you can't save this pawn. I saw this. I saw this with 2 minutes on the clock. Yo, I'm crazy. I'm a crazy person. White made a major blunder of never playing their king during this endgame. You literally have to play your king to go into the center to try to map against my king. A king is worth 5 points in the endgame if it's strong. My king is worth 10 points right now. Knight f7 check. King here, you can't stop my king from going to c3 and taking these pawns. Knight d6, king here. And now my opponent has realized for 2 moves now that it's completely over and sacks a bishop to defuse my counterplay basically. So the plan here for white is that they're gonna try to scoop up these pawns or try to trade these pawns and have a knight against knight and bishop and have a draw there. So I'm taking these pawns quick, and now my opponent finds a really nice resource. I have to give up this pawn here. Knight g5, knight f7 is threatened. And so now I just bring my king. We're rushing here. King b5, knight g5. On h6 to try to save my pawn, knight f7, and my pawn is still blocked. King c5, knight takes, king e d5. And here my opponent, I feel like my opponent's giving up h4 is played. Still no king move. My opponent is not going for a king plan to try to win this pawn. My opponent is going to sack their knight against this pawn by playing h4. That's the revelation. And we're gonna get a bishop and knight against king endgame, one of the rarest endgames in all of chess. And if you know it, you're lucky. If you don't know it, tough times. I go king e4. I just go scoop up these pawns until my opponent sacks their knight. And now after I take this pawn, I have 50 moves to checkmate this white king. If I don't checkmate in 50 moves, my opponent can claim a 50 moves, no pawns or no pawn moves or captures, and claim a draw. So it's very important that I have 50 moves from move 55 here till move 105 to win this game. Now, fortunately for me, I know this endgame. And may I say, without spoiling too much, that I played this absolutely flawlessly. If you're wondering how to checkmate with a knight and bishop, go find, I think you can search it up on YouTube, knight and bishop checkmate. I have a very nice YouTube short on it. What I suggest to everybody watching who is an avid chess player and who wants to be very good at chess and plays tournaments competitively, I would suggest to learn the patterns, learn it twice, go through it twice, and then practice it against a top engine as many times as you can in a full day. Dedicate just a full day to this, and then in 6 months, you repeat it, you do it another time, you practice the patterns, and then you practice it against a computer, and then you got it for life. And that's what I did, and this is how it came out. So I'm on move 55, I have to checkmate before move 105. The king stays in the center first. I go with a very nice bishop here. The bishop here forces the king to go back to the third rank. So bishop, king back, and now a nice little bishop maneuver, bishop here now. I'm taking up the exit squares of this king, and taking up all these squares really, and forcing the king to c2. The king is already on the second rank after like 7 moves. I was so impressed with myself. I was looking at my score sheet. You have to keep track to not like succumb to the draw. I looked at my score sheet. I was like, we're only 8 moves in, and the king's on the second rank. So now I go king d4, and my opponent has a game time decision here. Either you go for king b1 And the white king wants to go to the opposite color square of this bishop to try to draw. That's the best way for white to draw. Or you go along this second rank and try to play it along. If you go along this second rank, black will try to just like play against this king like this and try to chop up these two squares so the king is forced onto the first rank. I was fine with either or, but king b1 is really much easier for me because I started studying this endgame from king on the first rank like this. So now the key square is king c3, king a1, and now I know the pattern. And the second I got comfortable, like from this move on, it's completely over. I found mate in 12 that was forced. Knight b4, king here, knight c2. So rerouting my knight to take up these squares. I want to bring the king all the way to the light square corner, the square of my bishop, so that's where I can checkmate the king. So the king is forced to c1, and now I play bishop a2. Again, forcing this king to d1. And now we repeat a pattern that we saw earlier. Right now is like this. So I go like this, king here, and I go king here. The king has two options. This is more testing, I believe. I go like knight here. The king even emerges on the third rank, but I go bishop here, taking up all these squares, and then king here, bishop here. And the king is forced to right back down to the first rank. I'll go like this, and the king is straight into the corner. But my opponent goes with king d1. Learn both lines. That's my suggestion to you. King d1, and now you can see, which I'm very proud of, is that I'm actually gaining time on my clock. From the last 10 moves, I haven't thought a second here. That's how sure I am of this position, of this endgame. And now I find mate in 12. Knight e2, forcing the king here, king here. King e3, the king goes back, tries to irritate me and threaten king c2 to get it back out. Bishop b3 check. The king goes here. And now you want to drop just like a waiting move to force the king back to f1. So that happens, and now I go knight f4. And the king goes back to e1, and I go check, king here, king f3, and now the king is constrained to two squares, and that is usually the GGs. King g3, king f1, and then I go bishop b5 check, king g1. And my opponent, somewhere in this endgame, pauses the clock and stops the game and asks the arbiter over and asks how it works. He's like, how does it work? Either I claim the moves in 50 moves, or what? How does it work? And then he drops something that made us both laugh. He says, I'm sure he'll checkmate me anyways. And I found that very funny, because I did checkmate anyways, and yeah, I just like started laughing completely because, I don't know, the stress was kind of off when he stopped the arbiter, and he also laughed, so it made the situation a little bit lighter. King to g3, and now it's just checkmate in a few moves. Knight f4, the king is forced to h1, and then I drop back another tempo move. I just want to keep the bishop here and line up the king on g1, so that on king g1 I have check, king here, and checkmate on the board. This is one of those rare times I have checkmated my opponent before they resigned. And there you have it, a bishop and knight checkmate, one of the rarest endgames in chess that I played to absolute perfection objectively. I'm not trying to flex, I just like objectively, this is better than I could have ever imagined. I got this in less than 30 moves. Thank you so much for watching. That's the way to bounce back into a tournament. Now I have 2 out of 3. And again, they disappointed me with the pairing. Rav, I'm playing against somebody who's 1700 tomorrow. I have 2 out of 3. I should be playing a good player now. It is what it is. The pairings did me wrong again. I'm up against a 1700. See you for round 4.